Greetings from the Tech Cave, Fenris here, and today I have in front of me the Nintendo GameCube. Now this GameCube was sent my way by Mark Duddleson, or Triforce, from My Life in Gaming, and he sent this system my way because apparently he was having some disk reading issues with it. So I figured, you know what, since I had yet to really do any GameCube related content for this channel, I might as well make this the first one. So, in terms of the disk reading issues, this could be one of three potential faults. It's either going to be a capacitor issue, a laser issue, or a combination of both. But how exactly do we determine that? Well, first order of business, what we'll have to do is power on the system. It's in black and white because I haven't set it to composite. Actually, you know, let's just set it to composite mode. There we go. So we'll open it up and try to pop a disk in. And as you can see, it says no disk. But what we're gonna do is take the disk out and let this system warm up for about 10, maybe 15 minutes and try again later. Okay, so 10 minutes have passed, so now we can test again. So we're gonna go up to the gameplay menu, put our disk in, and let's see what happens. And look at that, now it's able to see the disk. So we're gonna hit start just to make sure it goes into the game. Now the reason why this occurs is because when the disk drive capacitors start entering a failing state, it takes much longer for it to actually fully charge up. So when they're not fully charged up, the laser just decides that it doesn't want to work at all. Now that's kind of like a very casual way of explaining it. There is a little bit more technicality into it, but I don't want to get into that. All you need to know is that when the capacitors start going bad, the laser won't always read the first time. Objection! Okay, so Future Fenris here, and as you can see, I have a different GameCube than the one that I'm working on for this video. And that's because, while editing this video, I realized that I neglected to explain exactly what causes the disk drive capacitors to fail prematurely. So, if we remove the disk drive here, we will see that aside from the fact that this particular GameCube is rather dirty, that the heatsink for the core chipset is directly below the location of the disk drive's logic board, with only a single layer of metal shielding to protect it. Due to this, the logic board is constantly exposed to the main source of heat radiation, which effectively accelerates the decay of the logic board's capacitors. And this is just an inherent flaw with the GameCube's design itself, so there isn't really any way of fixing it other than just making sure that your system and your fan is clean, so there isn't anything causing the bulk of the heat to be trapped inside. So with that out of the way, let's continue. So when testing a GameCube or really any sort of disk drive based system, I highly recommend that you do this quick 10-minute test just to make sure that it's a capacitor issue and not a laser issue, so you're not wasting your time with that. Now with that out of the way, we can see that the game is fully working, so we're just gonna power it off. And yeah, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be replacing the optical drive capacitors. So let's not waste any time and get to it. As always, it starts with a teardown, so we're just gonna flip the GameCube over, and we just need to remove 4 security screws. Okay, so now that we got the top shell removed, we can now remove this controller panel, this back panel, and we now need to remove all of the Phillips screws that lock the disk drive in place. So let's get to it. All right, with all those screws removed, the disk drive should just pop out. So now we need to just move this aside because we won't be needing to deal with this. And we're going to be turning our attention to the disk drive. So when it comes to working with the disk drive, what we need to do is we need to remove the actual drive itself from the top shielding in order to get access to the drive board that's underneath. That's where we're going to be doing all of our work. So in order to make sure that we don't damage this laser, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of cloth or something and cover it so that way we don't damage the laser while we flip it over and remove the screws. So let me just get some cloth and tape it over the laser, and we can go ahead with those screws.
A few moments later.
Okay, I couldn't find a piece of cloth that was small enough for me to tape over the laser, but I do have this, so we'll just have to work with it. So just gonna place that over, flip it over, and remove some screws. Okay, so now we need to remove the drive board from the rest of the disk drive. So in order to do that, in addition to the 4 screws that we need to remove in the corners here, we also need to disengage this Molex connector and these 2 ribbons, and as well, we need to desolder these 2 wires. And fortunately, when it comes to reassembly, they labeled what color these wires are, so we don't have to worry about making sure that we get it just right. So let's start with the Molex connector. Just gonna take some flat tweezers here and try to work it out. You want to be careful you don't accidentally hit any SMD components, but you just want to gently rock it out. Come on. All right. First cable disengaged. We're just going to take care of this flat flex cable. Try not to knock off the guard. This is for the laser. Then we're just going to come in here. This one is a little bit sharper, so we're just going to try to see if we can rock it out actually. There we go. And then of course for these 2 wires, just going to take a soldering iron, pinch 2 cables here, and there we go. So now let's get those screws removed. So now that we got the driver board extracted, we can now go ahead and replace all the capacitors. Now, technically speaking, what you could do is you could just check each of these capacitors, like do an ESR reading, and just see which ones are bad and just replace those. Though, my philosophy with that is, if 1 or 2 of the capacitors are going bad, it's probably just better to do a full recap, so that way you just kind of refresh the board, if you will. Now, with that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and remove these capacitors, and it's basically the same as like with the Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, or really any system that deals with these surface mount electrolyte capacitors. We're going to flux them up and hit it with the Hot Air Rework Station. So let's get to it. Okay, so with all the capacitors extracted, we can go ahead and clean the pads in preparation for our cap kit. Now, something I want to note, when removing these capacitors, you want to make sure that you take your time and go easy on pulling them out. And the main reason why is you'll notice there is a lot of small surface mount components that surround each of these capacitors. And because you need to heat the area around the capacitor in order to extract it, it is also really easy to knock off these surface mount components, which can lead to other problems down the line. So just pay close attention and just take your time when extracting these capacitors. Now, granted, you also want to make sure you don't burn the board, but that goes without saying. But in any case, let's just go ahead, get some desolder wick, clean up these pads, and install the new caps. Okay, so I screwed up just a little bit. So before installing the capacitors, I didn't make sure that I was recording, so yeah, we got a bit of a lost footage situation here. Whoops. But hey, you know what? We got the caps on at least, so that's good, right? But before we go about installing this back onto the disk drive, there is one thing that I want to bring attention to. Now, say that you decided to go ahead and recap the board just to see if maybe that could just spring your laser back to life. And even if your laser doesn't read at all, even after letting it warm up, there is a good chance that recapping it could spring it back to life. But say that you decide to recap it and it still doesn't work. Well, before considering a laser swap, what I recommend doing is checking this little piece right here. This is actually a variable resistor. And depending on what it reads, it could determine whether or not this little resistor has fallen out of spec. Now, normally, depending on your revision of GameCube, the value of this resistor will be different. So for DOL 101 systems, which is the one that only has the analog port, this should be anywhere between 100 to 250 ohms. Now, in our case, we're working with a DOL 001, or, the launch era systems. That's the one with the analog and the digital port. This resistor should be at anywhere between 450 to 600 ohms. And we can actually verify that by taking our multimeter. Let's just see if I get it in frame. I did. Pull this to the side. And with our multimeter set to 2000 ohm mode, we're going to probe one leg, and then we're going to probe the leftmost pin. And as you can see, we're reading 458 ohms. So this resistor is well within spec. So now that we've verified that the board is good, let's go ahead and reinstall this. Okay, now that we got the bottom half of the GameCube here, we're going to do like a quick and dirty reassembly, just so that way we could test the system. So first, we're gonna put the shielding on, and we're also gonna plug the controller port back in, or try to. There we go. We're going to take our disk drive, make sure it's lined up. Plug that in. And let's get to ground level cam and test the system. Okay, so as you can see, I have the GameCube all hooked up, my copy of Star Fox Adventure plugged in, and we're going to see if the system can now read games straight from cold boot. And to do that, what we're going to do is I'm going to put my thumb on these two back switches here, hit power, and we're going to see if it boots the game. Alright, so far so good. And look at that! We're booting into Star Fox Adventures. So yeah, this was a successful recap. No more needing to wait like 10 to 15 minutes just for the GameCube to work. Alright, let's power this off. Alright, so now that we know the GameCube works, we can now move on to the final steps, which is replacing this battery here, as well as reassembling the cube. Okay, so we're almost done reassembling the GameCube, and all that's left to do is to put on the top shell. Now, something that I want to note real quick, when putting the top shell back onto a GameCube, you want to make sure that the lid is fully open. The reason why is, if you don't open the lid, it'll end up catching the lid switches here, and the best case scenario from that point is that your GameCube won't be able to open anymore. The worst case scenario is it will actually break these switches, and replacing these switches can be a little expensive. So, rather than have to deal with all that, it's better to just make sure that the lid is open, so that way you can just come down and just click it on just fine. And as you can see, we're able to open and close the GameCube just fine. So, now what's all left to do is to put the 4 screws on and do some final testing. Okay, so final round of testing. We're going to see if the GameCube still boots and still reads disk from cold boot. So, we're going to fire up the GameCube. Let's just skip to the menu. Pop in our disk. And yep, we're still reading from cold boot. Making sure that we can get into the game. And yep, we are. So Star Fox Adventures is working, so that means our GameCube is all good to go. Now, I didn't reset the time on this because, actually, let me power this off. I didn't reset the time on this, even though I did just change the battery. I'll let Try figure that out, but yeah, in the meantime, this GameCube is basically good to go. So, I'm gonna take that out, and yeah. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope this is helpful for you. If you ever pick up some GameCubes with the intent of, repairing them, always check the capacitors first just to make sure that's the problem. And if it's not the capacitors, then maybe look into a laser replacement. So, yeah, with that being said, if you liked what you saw, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, until the blue moon rises, I'll see you next time.